The worldly sequence, the major arcana, and personal growth. The first line of the major arcana takes us through the process of maturity. It shows the stages of a person's growth from a child, to whom mother is all loving and father is all powerful, through education to the point where the child becomes an independent personality. At the same time, these cards deal with a much wider development, of which the individual development is a microcosm. They depict the creation of human society out of both archetypes of existence and the chaotic energy of nature. While they set the principles for the whole deck, the magician and the high priestess apply very specifically to the first line. The movement between opposites is the basic rhythm of the material world. Nothing exists absolutely in nature. In the words of Ursula Le Guin, light is the left hand of darkness, and darkness is the right hand of light. When we move from the two principles to Empress, we are seeing the opposite mingle together in nature to produce the reality of the physical universe. The middle three cards of the line are set. They show us a triad of nature, society, and the church. They also signify mother, father, and education. In ancient Egypt, the Godhead was often viewed as a trinity. The persons changed from place to place and through the years, but they were usually a female and two males, with the female viewed as supreme. In the Chariot, nature, symbolized by the Empress, is the underlying reality, while our consorts, symbolized by the Emperor and the Hierophant, are human constructs. The last two cards of the line represent the problems of the individual love and sorrow, surrender and will. At some point, each one of us must learn to distinguish ourselves from the outer world. Before this time, personality remains a vague and formless creation of parents and society. Those who never make the break become cut off from a full life. For most people, the medium by which they break from their parents is the emergence. Freudians and perhaps occultists would say re-emergence of the sexual drive at puberty. It is no accident that children rebel from their parents in ideas, habits, and dress at the same time that their bodies grow towards maturity. The development of individuality is only a part of growth. Each person must find his or her personal goals and achievements. At the same time, he or she will sooner or later face sorrow, sickness, and the general weakness of life governed by old age and death. Only when we reach a full understanding of the outer life of humanity can we hope to reach inward for deeper reality. The Empress. As stated in the previous chapter, the Empress represents the more accessible, more benign aspects of the female archetype. She is motherhood, love, gentleness. At the same time, she signifies sexuality, emotion, and the female as mistress. Both motherhood and sex derive from feeling that are non-intellectual and basic to life, passions rather than ideas. The high priestess represented the mental side of the female archetype, her deep intuitive understanding. The Empress is pure emotion. Like the cunning woman, we see her reflect in our movies and novels as the exasperating female, who both frustrates and delights, because her thought processes follow no rational development. Many women find this image insulting, partly because it represents values and approaches judged as negative by our patriarchal society, and partly because people make the error of assuming that women and men should personally express these archetypal ideas. But the social images are crippling in another way as well. They are trivial. The Empress, along with such mythological counterparts as Aphrodite or Ishtar or Arzule, represent something very grand. They signify the passionate approach to life. They give and take experience and uncontrolled feeling. Until we learn to experience the outer world completely, we cannot hope to transcend it. Therefore, the first step to enlightenment is sensuality. Only through passion can we sense from deep inside rather than through intellectual argument, a spirit that fills all existence. Many people see religion as an alternative to the natural world, which they view as somehow impure or dirty. Though our cultural tradition fosters this duality, it is really an illusion, and a person who appreciates spirituality with this motivation to escape will likely never achieve a very developed understanding. The body and the natural world are realities that must be integrated rather than denied. In the mythology of Buddhism, we find that the gods manipulated Prince Siddhartha's father to providing his son, Gautama, with every sensual satisfaction. The father believed that pleasure would prevent his son from renouncing the world and becoming a Buddha. The scheme backfired because only after he had completely experienced sensuality could the prince leave it behind. After renouncing the world, Gautama joined the ascetics, the other pole, but he reached enlightenment only when he had rejected both extremes for the middle way. Thus we can see the Buddha in the world dancer, who holds both the magician and the high priestesses lightly in her hands. As a combination of 1 and 2, the number 3 signifies synthesis and harmony. The natural world combines the magician and the high priestess in an indivisible unity of life and death, darkness and light. The idea of emotion also brings together the magician archetype of activeness with the high priestess archetype of instinct. Consider as well the process of creation. The magician symbolizes the energy of life, the high priestess the possibilities of future development. The reality of the Empress results from their combinations. Recently, Carl Sagan demonstrated that life on Earth might have begun when a lightning bolt struck the primordial sea. Thus again, from the lightning of the magician striking the waters of the high priestess comes the natural world. The symbolism of the Waite-Smith Empress reflects the idea of nature with all its force and glory. The Empress herself, voluptuous and sensual, suggests passion. Her shield is a heart with the sign of Venus, the Roman version of the great goddess. Throughout the ancient world, the goddess ruled as Demeter, Astarte, Nut, until the patriarchal invaders demoted her to wife, and finally banished her altogether with an all-male godhead. At the Empress's feet grows a field of grain. The goddess ruled agriculture, and in northwestern Europe was called the corn goddess. She wears a necklace of 9 pearls for the 9 planets, while her crown contains 12 stars for the signs of the zodiac. In short, she wears the universe as her jewelry. The Great Mother is not the form of nature, but the underlying principle of life. The stars are 6-pointed, a symbol much older than its current use as a social emblem for Judaism. The 6-pointed star combines 2 triangles. The upward one symbolizes fire, the downwards water. Again, the Empress combines trumps 1 and 2 in a new reality. A river flows from the trees behind her to disappear beneath her seat. This river is the force of life, running like a great current beneath all the separate forms of reality, and experienced most fully when we give ourselves to unrestrained passion. Deep in ourselves, we can sense the rhythm of a river, carrying us forward through experience until, with death, our individual lives return to the sea of existence. The river symbolizes also the unity of change and stability. The water in it is never the same, yet it always remains a particular river, with its own special qualities. Human beings change from day to day. The cells of our bodies die and new ones take their place, yet we always remain ourselves. The number 3 produced by the combination of 1 and 2 brings out yet another idea. Just as the numbers 1 and 2 stood specifically for male and female, so the number 3 signifies the child produced by their joining together. The child is born as a creature of nature, unburdened with ego and personality, experiencing the universe directly without controls or labels. It is only as we grow older that we learn to put barriers between ourselves and life. It is one of the goals of the Chariot to return us to that natural state of directly experiencing the world around us. But if the Empress signifies a child, she also stands for the mother. Motherhood is the basic means by which life continues throughout nature. And because the physical bond of the mother and child is so direct, mother love in its strongest form, is pure feeling, given without intellectual or moral considerations. This is, of course, an ideal, and in reality such love may come more from the male parent than the female, or sadly not at all. Throughout the history, people have identified motherhood with nature, so that the term Great Mother for the earth itself appears all over the world. And even today, we speak vaguely of Mother Nature. In readings, the Empress represents a time of passion, a period when we approach life through feelings and pleasure rather than thought. The passion is sexual or motherly. Either way, it is deeply experienced and in the right context can give great satisfaction. In the wrong context, when analysis is needed, the Empress can mean a stubborn emotional approach, a refusal to consider the facts. She can indicate another problem as well, self-indulgent pleasure when restraint is needed. Usually, however, she indicates satisfaction and even understanding gained through the emotions. The reverse meanings of the cards also have their positive and negative contexts. On the one hand, it can signify a retreat from feeling, either rejecting your emotions or attempting to suppress your desires, particularly sexual. However, just as the High Priestess upside down added the missing elements of involvement, so the Empress reverse can mean a new intellectual awareness, especially the solving of some complicated emotional problem by calmly thinking it through. In the right side up, reversed meanings, trumps 2 and 3 are mirrors of each other. It sometimes happens that in a reading both will appear upside down. This means that the person expresses both emotional and intuitive mental aspects, but in a negative way. Rationality comes as a reaction to excessive emotional involvement, while a feeling of isolation or coldness leads to passion. If 2 aspects of the goddess can be expressed right side up, the person will achieve a more stable and rewarding balance. The Emperor. For each child, its parents are archetypes, not just mother and father, but mother and father. Because our mothers give us life and feed us, shelter us, we tend to see them as figures of love and mercy, and get very upset when they act harshly or coldly. But the father, especially in traditional times, when the sex roles were stricter, remained more remote, and therefore a figure of severity. It was the father who bore the authority and thus became the judge, the father who punished, and the mother who intervened, and the father who taught us the rules of society, and then deemed obedience. To the child, the father is in many ways indistinguishable from society as a whole, just as the mother is in nature itself. One of the painful moments of maturity for many people comes when they discover the limited humanity of their parents. In Freud's scheme of mental development, the father and the rules of societies become directly linked. The infant psyche demands constant satisfaction, particularly in its desires for food and physical pleasure from the mother. Freudians may claim the child desires actual intercourse with its mother, but the situation holds even if the child seeks only the pleasure of being held against the mother's body. By interfering in the child's relationship to its mother, the father arouses the child's hostility. And for the still unrepressed infant, this means a desire to do away with the interference altogether. The urge to destroy the father, however, cannot be consummated or even recognized, and so the psyche, to relieve the terrible dilemma, identifies itself with the father image, creating a superego as a new idea or guide for the self, replacing the id, the urges and desires which led to such a crisis. But what forms does this superego take? Precisely that of the rules of society traditionally learned under the father's guidance. Trumps 3 and 4 of the tarot represent the parents in their archetype roles. But just as the Empress signified the natural world, so the Emperor carries the wider significance of the social world, married to nature. He symbolizes the laws of society, both good and bad, and the power that enforces them. In ancient times, where the goddess reigned, the king performed a special function. New life can only come from death. Therefore, each winter the goddess's representatives sacrifice the old king, very often dismembering him and planting the pieces in the ground, thereby mystically fertilizing the earth. Later, when the male-dominated religions took over, the king came to symbolize the rule of law, which had clamped a lid of repression on what seemed to be the patriarchs as the monstrous and chaotic darkness of the old order. We see this drama, much like Freudian substitution of the superego for id, in many myths, such as Marduk, national hero of Babylon, killing Tiamat, the original mother of creation, because she is giving birth to monsters. Whether or not we see the old way as monstrous or the new as civilized, the emperor symbolizes the abstraction of society, replacing the direct experience of nature. In Rome, the concept of law versus chaos was carried to the point where stability, or law and order, to use the modern term, became virtuous in themselves, apart from the inherent morality of those laws. No progress can be made in conditions of anarchy, runs the argument. Bad laws need to be changed. But first, a law must be obeyed at all costs. Any other approach can only destroy society. Today we see this viewpoint embodied in an abstraction we call the system. The Romans saw it more concretely in the personal figure of the emperor, whom they described as the father of all his people. In the emperor's best aspect, he indicates the stability of a just society that allows its members to pursue their personal needs and development. The natural world is chaotic. Without some kind of social structure, we could each spend all our lives fighting to survive. Society allows all of us to work together and to benefit from the experience of those who lived before us. Stability allows spiritual development as well. In many countries, society supports the churches, though whether this arrangement furthers spirituality is arguable. In some Eastern countries, monks are free to pursue their studies because laymen fill their beggar bowls. Without this social custom, they would have to spend their time working to get bread. In its more negative aspects, the emperor represents the power of unjust laws in a society where stability takes prejudice over morality. Once we establish law and order as supreme, then a corrupt ruler becomes a disaster. But if the entire system is corrupt, producing only bad rulers, then stability becomes the enemy of morality. The value of the symbol of the emperor depends a very great deal on the time and place. In an unjust society, the emperor's power hinders rather than helps personal development. A great many people have gone to jail for attacking unjust laws. Even at its best, however, the emperor remains limited. Over the spontaneity of the Empress, he has laid a network of repression. If we lose touch with our passions, then life becomes cold and barren. The rider pack emperor, see figure 5a, is drawn as an old and stiff-dressed iron, representing the sterility of a life rigidly governed by rules. The river, which flowed so powerfully through the Empress's garden, has here become a thin stream barely able to penetrate a lifeless desert. The card's other symbolism reflects its dual aspects. He holds an ankh, Egyptian symbol of life, to indicate that under the law he bears the power of life and death, and will hopefully use it well. 4 rams, symbols of Aries, adorn his throne, while at the crown's peak he bears the sign of Aries, unfortunately resembling a propeller. Now, Aries symbolizes force, aggression, and war, but as the first sign of the zodiac, it also signifies the new life of spring, which can emerge from the stability of a just society. As the middle card of the first line of the major arcana, the emperor represents a crucial test. In the process of growing up, it is indeed the rules of society that many people find most difficult to surmount. We must absorb these rules, as well as our society's traditions and beliefs, and go beyond them to find a personal code of conduct. This does not mean that rulers are made to be broken. People who feel compelled to flaunt all laws remain as bound to those laws as the person who follows them blindly. Because of the father's role in teaching us acceptably social behavior, people who have trapped at the level of the emperor are often people who have never really accepted the ordinary humanity of their father. They may recognize it rationally, but it disturbs and haunts them. Similar problems plague those people for whom the Empress remains their mothers, rather than their own passions and sensuality. The idea of the emperor as that of the limited value of the social structure arises mainly from White as his followers. The picture on the right at the start of this section from Paul Foster Case's Builders of the Adutum BOTA deck draws by Jesse Burns Park illustrates another tradition. Here the emperor symbolizes the sum total of spiritual knowledge. He is drawn in profile. This is much more common than the rider pack full-face image, linking him to the Kabbalist image for God as the Ancient of Days, a seated king in profile. The Ancient's face was never visible, only his crown with a radiance beneath. The emperor's arms and legs form an equilateral triangle over a cross, the alchemical sign for fire. This figure is later reversed in White as well as Case in the Hanged Man. The BOTA emperor sits on a cube rather than a throne, also an esoteric symbol. The cube symbolizes both the world and the Chariot itself, as well as the Hebrew alphabet and the paths of the Tree of Life. The symbolism arises from the fact that a cube contains 12 edges, 6 faces, 3 axes, and of course a center, adding up to 22, the number of trumps, Hebrew letters, and paths. And because the Tree of Life is held to represent all creation and the cube symbolizes the universe, in readings the emperor indicates following the rider pack image. The power of society, its laws, and especially its authority to enforce those laws. The appearance of the trump indicates an encounter with the law. Again, the good or bad qualities depend on the context. More personally, the emperor can signify a time of stability and order in a person's life, hopefully opening up creative energy. He can also indicate a specific person who holds great power, either objective or emotional, over the subject. This is very often the father, but it can also be a husband or a lover, especially for people who treat their lovers as substitute fathers to whom they surrender control of their lives. I have seen readings so dominated by the emperor that all the lives' possibilities become stunted and unfulfilled. As a card of personal qualities, the emperor can indicate the ability to defend one's territory, to create firm boundaries, and to vigorously maintain them. He symbolizes a rational approach to issues, one that values analysis and measurement over emotion and intuition. Like the Empress reversed, the emperor, when upside down, receives those elements complementary to his qualities when he is the right way up. He is White's terms benevolence and compassion, new life in a stony desert. But the pendulum can swing too far. The reversed emperor can signify immaturity and the inability to make harsh decisions and carry them through. Figure 6. The Hierophant. In most tarot decks, Trump 5 is called either the Pope or the High Priest, terms which connected by name as well as picture to Trump 2, the archetype of inner truth. White wrote that he rejected Pope because the title suggested a very specific example of the Trump's general idea. The name Hierophant belonged to the High Priestess of the Greek Eleusinian Mysteries. Now, White described his card as symbolizing the outer way of churches and dogma, but his use of the mystery term suggests another interpretation, one more favored by those who see the tarot as a secret doctrine of occult practices rather than a more general embodiment of human patterns. This interpretation is dramatically portrayed in the picture of the Hierophant from Aleister Crowley's Book of Thoth, drawn by Frida Harris. Here the trump signifies initiation into the secret doctrine, such as the various orders and lodges which flourished around the turn of the century, which have undergone a revival in England and in America. The Order of the Golden Dawn, to which White and Crowley at one time both belonged, possibly originated the term Hierophant for Trump 5. These two meanings, outer way and secret doctrine, appear contradictory on the most elementary level. In reality, they are very similar. Whether the two archetypes allocates are being admitted to the church or to an occult society, they are still entering a doctrine with a set of belief which they must learn and accept before they can gain entrance. There is, of course, a fundamental difference between, say, the catechism and the rituals of the Golden Dawn. For both, however, the trump indicates an education and a tradition. Therefore, if we see the first line as describing the development of the personality, then the Hierophant, coming after the natural world and society, indicates the intellectual tradition of the person's particular society and his or her education in that tradition. Following Waite's interpretation and thinking specifically of the Western Pope, we can see the Hierophant as a companion to the Emperor. The word Pope means father, and like the Roman Emperor, the Pope is seen as a wise father guiding his children. Together, they share responsibility for humanity, the one providing physical needs, the other guiding spiritual growth. In one of the earliest treatises urging separation of the church and state, Dante urged that the two functions must not be combined for fear of corruption. However, he never questioned the idea that the church is responsible for our souls. Today, many people do not understand the basic idea of priesthood. Our democratic age rejects the notion of an intermediary between an individual and God. Note, however, that the Hierophant can also symbolize the dictatorship of the proletariat, or any other elite leading the masses where they cannot go themselves. Originally, the special function of the priests was evident. They spoke to the gods through the oracles, an often terrifying practice, and most people quite happily let someone else do it for them. When Christianity rejected such graphic and immediate connection to God, the idea of the priest became, like the emperor, more abstract. Basically, it depends on the notion that most people do not really care much about God. The average person is happiest following worldly pursuits, money, family, and politics. There are, however, certain people who, by temperament, feel very directly the spirit that runs through all our lives. Called to the priesthood by their own inner awareness, these people can speak to God for us. More importantly, they can speak to us, interpreting God's law so we may live proper lives, and eventually after death, receive our reward of returning to God. After the resurrection, we ourselves will dwell in sight of God. In life, however, we need the priests to guide us. So runs the argument. Even if we agree with the principle, in practice it tends to break down. People become priests for all sorts of reasons, ambition, family pressure, etc., while those who do feel a genuine calling to communicate with God may show very little talent for communicating with people. Moreover, like the social institutions of the emperor, the religious institutions of the Hierophant can easily become corrupted by the authority given them, so that the priests see their power as an end in itself, prizing obedience over enlightenment. Obviously, the position of defending a doctrine will attract doctrinaire people. Perhaps, however, we reject the idea of guiding priesthood for a more subtle reason. Ever since the Reformation, a notion that has gained greater and greater force in the West is that of the individual's ultimate responsibility for him or herself. The whole idea of an outer doctrine, a code of words and rules and beliefs accepted on faith, depends on the assumption that most people prefer to have someone else tell them what to do and think. This may very well be true. To really discover God inside yourself, you must undergo some uncomfortable confrontation in which your own psyche, similarly to decide for yourself what is the moral thing to do in all situations, might require a constant agony of choice. Nevertheless, many people today simply cannot accept either society or a church bearing the ultimate responsibility for their lives. Perhaps the interpretation of the Hierophant as representing secret doctrines suits our age better. For then the doctrine does not tell us what to do, but instead gives us direction to begin working on ourselves. And the Chariot, as we saw with the magician, sets itself against all churches by leading us to their personal salvation in this life. For Crowley, the Hierophant represented initiation as the means through which the individual becomes united with the universe. The form and doctrine of the initiation change with each world age. Having lasted nearly 2,000 years, the current Pacian age is coming to a close, so that the Hierophant is due to change. As will all strictly human relationships, Crowley comments that only the future can tell us what the new current of initiation will be. But the basic quality of initiation, as emerging with the cosmos always, remains the same. In the BOTA version of the Hierophant, as in the Rider Pack, the crossed keys at the Hierophant's feet are gold and silver, representing the outer and inner ways, the sun and moon, the magician and the high priestess, which the doctrine teaches us to combine. In the Rider Pack card, both keys are gold, indicating that the dark side is hidden from those who follow the outer doctrine. In the Waite Smith's imagery, no veil blocks the entrance to the church, as in the temple of the high priestess, but the pillars are a dull gray. Those who enter here may receive protection from personal choice, but they will not pierce the secrets of duality. The unconsciousness remains closed. In many tarot decks, the high priestess holds not a scroll but a small book, locked, and the keys of the Hierophant do not fit that tantalizing lock. Still, we must not think that the outer doctrine of religious serves no purpose to the seeker. Like the general education, of which it is a particular example, it gives the individual a firm tradition in which to root his or her personal development. The modern Western phenomenon of a kind of electric mysticism, drawing inspiration from all religions, is an extremely unusual development. This is based possibly on global awareness, plus the view of religion as a psychological state divorced from science and history. Thus we see religion as an experience rather than as an explanation of the universe, and accept that all religious experiences are valid, whatever contradictions they show on the surface. While this idea opens great possibilities, many people have noted its potential shallowness. The fact is, throughout the centuries, the great mystics have always spoken from deep within a tradition. The Kabbalists were thoroughly Jewish, Thomas A. Kempis is a complete Christian, and Sufis bowed to Mecca, which all other Orthodox Muslims. In its aspects, the Hierophant, its outer doctrine, can give us a place to start in creating a personal awareness of God. One further aspect of the card's symbolism deserves special attention. The position of three people, that is, a large figure presiding over two smaller ones on either side, introduces a motif that repeats itself like the two pillars of the high priestess. Throughout the major arcana, and is resolved in judgment and in the world, the very next two cards after trump 5 repeat the motif, with the angel over the lovers and the charioteer over the chariot over the black and white sphinxes. We can see this trio as an emblem of the idea of a triad, such as the Christian Trinity, or the triune picture of the mind, the id, ego, superego of Freud, or the conscious, unconscious, superconsciousness of the three lines of the major arcana. To understand the meaning of the image, we must return to the high priestess. She sits between two pillars, symbolizing the dualities of life. She herself signifies one side, the magician the other. The Hierophant initiates two acolytes into his church. We see, therefore, that the Hierophant and the lovers and the chariot all represent attempts to mediate between the opposing poles of life and find some way not to resolve them but simply to hold them in balance. A religious doctrine, with its moral codes and explanations for life's most basic questions, does just that. If we surrender ourselves to a church, that contradictions of life all become answered but not resolved. In reading, the card signifies churches, doctrines, and education in general. Psychologically, it can indicate orthodoxy, conformity to society's ideas and codes of behavior, as well as, more subtly, a surrender of responsibility. The Emperor symbolizes the rules themselves as their official enforcers. The Hierophant indicates our own inner sense of obedience. Reversed, the card means unorthodoxy, especially mental, forming original ideas. It can also, however, mean gullibility, and this idea suggests another virtue of the card when it is the right way up. The society builds its intellectual tradition over years of hundreds of years. Those who accept that tradition receive from it a standard by which to judge new ideas and information. Those who reject it must find their own way and can easily get lost in superficial ideas. There are many people who having giving up the dogma forced onto them as children, fall into some new dogma, a cult, or some extremist political group. Just as rigid and perhaps more shallow, having rejected tradition, they have not really rejected the Hierophant. They have not accepted the responsibility of truly finding their own way. Figure 7. The Lovers. Of the various changes Arthur White and Pamelia Smith made in traditional tarot design, the card of the Lovers remains the most dramatic. Where the Tarot de Marseillaise, on the right above, shows a young man struck by Cupid's arrow and forced to choose between two women, the Rider pack shows a mature man and a single woman, presided over by an angel. Further, while most decks indicate only a social situation, the Rider pack image clearly suggests the Garden of Eden, or rather a new Garden of Eden, with the trees bringing enlightenment rather than the fall. The earlier version of Trump 6 sometimes bears the title The Choice, and in divinatory readings means an important choice between two desires. Because one woman is fair and the other dark, a symbolism traditional in Europe where darkness always indicates evil and women in general indicates temptation. The choice was seen as between something respectable by perhaps dull and sometimes greatly desired by morally improper. The card can refer to a minor choice or even to a major crisis in a person's life. We see this ancient symbolism today in the various novels and films of middle-aged, middle-class men tempted to give up their loved but rather boring wives for a younger, wilder woman. The choice can in fact extend to a person's whole life. Even those people who never question the boundaries of their middle class respectably have made a choice as much as the lifelong criminal. And there are many people who outwardly live socially acceptable lives, yet inwardly fight constant torments of desire. Fighting urges to adultery or violence, or simply a desire to leave home and become a wandering tramp. On the esoteric level, the choice between the light and dark woman indicates the choice between the outer path, symbolized in the Rider pack by the Hierophant, where your life is laid out for you, and the inner path of the occultist, which can lead to a confrontation with your hidden desires. The church labeled magicians as devil worshippers, and in Christian allegories, the dark woman usually stood for Satan. These meanings all seen the choice between light and dark in the widest possible terms. In the context of the first line of trumps, we can see in a much more specific way that of the first real choice a person makes independently of his or her parents until the sexual urge arouses itself. Most people are content to act at their parents' expectations for them. The sexual urge, however, points us where it wants to go. As a result, we begin to break away in other areas as well. It is very rare that the partners our parents would choose for us are the ones we would choose for ourselves. If the difference is too extreme, or the parents too controlling, then the person can face a painful choice. Paul Douglas has commented that the dark-haired woman, who appears much older, is the boy's mother, and the choice is whether to stay under her protection or strike out on his own. Those who believe with Freud that a boy's first desire is desired towards his mother will see her here, a classic Oedipal dilemma. One part of the personality wishes to maintain the hidden fantasy life of a union with the mother, while the other wishes to find a true love in the reality of the boy's own generation. But we do not have to accept the Freudian doctrine to see the wider implications of this choice. Whether or not the boy secretly desires his mother, the life lived under the parent's protection is safe and comfortable, but he or she, for girls, basically face the same question, though sometimes in different forms, can never become a true individual without making a break, and nothing indicates this more strongly than sexuality. Therefore, the traditional version of Trump 6 represents adolescence. Not only does sexuality emerge at this time, but also intellectual and moral independence. Cards 3, 4, and 5 represented us as shaped by the great forces of nature, society, and parents. In card 6, the individual emerges, a true personality with its own ideas and purposes, able to make important choices based not on parental orders, but on its own assessment of desires and responsibilities. These meanings belong to the card's traditional structure. In designing his own version of the lover's weight, addressed a different question. What functions do sex and love ultimately serve in a person's life? And what deep meanings can we find in the powerful drama of two people joining their hearts and bodies? Waite called his picture the card of human love, here exhibited as part of the way, the truth, and the life. The sexual drive leads us away from isolation. It pushes us to form vital relationships with other people, and finally opens the way to love. Through love, we not only achieve a unity with someone else, but we are given a glimpse of the greater meanings and deeper significance of life. In love, we give up part of that ego control which isolates us not only from other people, but from life itself. Therefore, the angel appears above the man's and woman's heads, a vision, unobtainable to each person individually, but glimpsed by both of them together. Religion, philosophy, and art have always seized on the symbolism of male and female as representing duality. We have already seen this idea reflected in the magician and the high priestess, as well as the empress and the emperor. The symbolism here is reinforced by the fact that the tree of life with its magician-like flame stands behind the woman, while the tree of knowledge, entwined with the serpent, symbol not of evil but of unconscious wisdom, stands behind the woman. The angel unites these two principles. In traditional teachings, men and women are held to contain within their bodies separate life principles. Through physical love, these principles join together. Occultists, however, have always recognized both these elements within the self. Today we hear many people say that everyone contains both male and female qualities. Usually, however, they are referring to the vague ideas of social behavior, such as aggression and gentleness. When male and female were seen as opposite in their deepest natures, the occultist's view was much more radical. One way of describing the goal of the major arcana is to say it brings out and unites the male and female principles. Therefore, in many decks, the dancer in the world is an hermaphrodite. According to Kabbalists and Hermetic philosophers, all humanity, and indeed even deity, was originally hermaphroditic. Thus, on the outer level, each of us is only half a person, and only through love can we find a sense of unity. We find this same idea in Plato, but with an interesting variation. One of the Platonic myths states that humans were originally double creatures, but of three kinds: male, female, male, male, and female, female. Believing that humans possessed too much power, Zeus split them with a thunderbolt, and now each one of us is looking for his or her other half. In contrast to the Jewish and Christian myths, Plato's story gives equal reality to homosexuals. It reminds us of the danger in the too easy symbolism of male and female as ultimate opposites. The magician and the high priestess are mixed very subtly in each of us, and the angel can be evoked by only two lovers. It is not the role that matters, but the reality of the union. In the usual Christian interpretation of Genesis, Eve bears the greater guilt, not only because she ate first, but because her sensuality tempted Adam to fall. Man supposedly was ruled by reason and woman by desire. This split led some Christians to declare that woman had no souls. The whole myth of the fall, however, with its emphasis on disobedience and punishment, is really meant to serve a repressive morality. Physical passions were seen as dangerous to society and therefore had to be controlled. As Joseph Campbell points out in The Masks of God, the ancient goddess religion of Palestine contained the same drama of a servant, a tree of life, and an apple. But in the old story, the initiate was given the apple by the goddess to allow him to enter paradise, rather than it being the cause of his exclusion. The ancient Hebrews reversed the myth, partly as a way of branding the old religion as evil, but also because they, like the Babylonians, considered the old ways monstrous. The Chariot, however, is a path of liberation. The figure that Jue expresses that human beings will become like us is precisely the Tarot's purpose, to fully bring out the divine spark in us and unite it with our conscious selves, to end the duality of God and human and make them one. Therefore, though it keeps much of the same symbolism as Genesis, the Rider Pack Lovers subtly reverses the meaning. Notice that while the man looks at the woman looks at the angel. If the male is indeed reason, then rationality could only reach beyond its limits through the medium of passion. By its nature, reason controls and contains, while passion tends to break down all limits. Our tradition has set the body and the rational mind at odds with each other. The Tarot teaches us that we must unite them. A single mountain rises between the two lovers, and that it is not the controlling power of reason that raises the senses to a higher level, but rather the other way around. We can see this in direct psychological terms. Most people are bound within their egos or the mask they present to the world. But if they can surrender to sexual passion, they can, at least for a moment, transcend their isolation. Those who cannot release their egos even for an instant misuse sex and are misused by it. Sex becomes a means of gaining power over someone else, but it never satisfies. When a person rejects the body's desire to release itself with another person, the result is depression. The angel has been denied. At the same time, the passions alone cannot bring us to the angel. They need to be guided by the reason as much as the reason needs the passion to set it free. Those who simply go wherever their desires lead them are often thrown from one experience to another. Paul Foster Case names the angel as Raphael, who presides over the superconscious. This brings us back to the triune mind. Here we learn that the three levels of the mind are not separate and isolated like the three stories of a house, but that the superconscious is actually a product of the conscious and unconscious joined together. The pathway lies through the unconscious because that is where we find the true energy of life. In fact, the superconscious can be described as the energy of the unconscious brought out and transformed to a higher state. Part of that transformation lies in the consciousness giving the energy form, direction, and meaning. If in the triangular motif, the two figures below represent the dualities of life, while the larger figure above symbolizes a meditating force between them, then in Trump 6, the mediator is sexual love. When we surrender to it, we experience a glimpse of something greater than ourselves. Only a glimpse, and only for a moment. True liberation requires finally a great deal more than passion, but love can help us see the path and know a little of the joy that awaits us at the end of it. A number of mystics, notably Saint Teresa, has described union with God in terms of sexual ecstasy. The divinatory meanings for White Smith image are straightforward. They refer to the importance of love in a person's life and to a specific lover, very often to a marriage or a long relationship. The card implies that the particular relationship has been or will prove to be very valuable to the person, leading him or her to a new understanding of life. If some specific problem is being considered in the reading that the lovers indicates help in some way, either practically through the lover's assistance or through emotional support, but this is not always true. The lovers in the position of the past, especially in relation to the cards indicating a refusal to look at the present situation, can indicate a crippling nostalgia for a past love. The earlier cards all represented archetypes. When we reverse them, we add the missing elements, but here the individual has advanced, and now the reversed meaning shows weakness and blocks. It is first of all a destructive love, particularly in a bad marriage. It can refer to romantic or sexual problems that dominate a person's life, either from difficulties with a specific person or because the person finds love simply a great problem. Because the Waite-Smith picture indicates a mature love, the traditional image shows the process of adolescence choice. Either version reversed indicates romantic immaturity, the prolonged adolescence that keeps some people involved in childish fantasies long after their bodies have fully matured. Figure 8. The Chariot. The earlier versions of this card, which showed the chariot pulled by two horses rather than two sphinxes, derives from a number of historical and mythological sources. Primarily, it comes out of the processes given in Rome and other places for conquering Hero. when his chariot carried him through the streets that were filled with cheering citizens. The custom apparently answers some deep psychic need for group participation. We still practice it today, 2,000 years later, in the parades given to presidents, generals, and astronauts with open limousines replacing the chariot. The chariot implies more than a great victory. To drive a two-horse vehicle at speed requires total control over the animals. That activity serves as a perfect vehicle for the powerful will. Plato, in the Phaedrus, refers to the mind as a chariot drawn by a black and white horse, the exact image of the chariot. A certain Hindu myth tells of Shiva destroying a triple city of the demons. To do so, he requires that all creation be subordinate to his will. The gods make a chariot for Shiva, using not only themselves but the heavens and the earth as materials. The sun and moon became the wheels and winds the horses. The symbol on the front of the chariot, like a nut and bolt or a wheel and axle, is called the lingam and yoni, standing for Shiva, the masculine principle, and Parvati, the feminine principle, united in a single figure. Through the myth's image, we learn the spiritual victory over evil comes when we focus all of nature, as well as the unconscious energy embodied in Shiva himself, through the conscious will. These two fables show two different aspects of the idea of will. The story of Shiva speaks of a true victory in which the spirit has found a focus to release its total force. But the Phaedrus gives us an image of the triumphant ego, which controls rather than resolves the basic conflicts of life. Those tarot commentators who see the cards as a group of separate images, each one contributing some vital lesson to our spiritual understanding, tend to give the chariot its wider meaning. They point out that the Kabbalistic title for the number 7, with all its mystic connotations, is victory. In many places, particularly India, the horse became associated with death and funerals. When the rising patriarchy abolished the ritual sacrifice of the king, a horse was killed instead. The horse sacrifice became the most holy, associated with immortality. Even today, horses are used to pull the coffins of great leaders. A bizarre junction of two aspects of the chariot was seen in the death of John Kennedy. He was killed in his limousine during a parade, and then a horse, who rebelled against his trainer's control, pulled his coffin in the state funeral. These connections suggest the idea of the soul's victory over mortality. When we look at the cards sequentially, we see that the 7 is only the victory of the first line of the major arcana. It crowns that line's process of maturation, but by necessity, it cannot address the great areas of the unconscious and superconscious. Seen this way, the chariot shows us the developed ego. The lessons of the early cards have been absorbed. The adolescent period of searching and self-creation has been passed, and now we see the mature adult, successful in life, admired by others, confident, and content with himself, able to control feelings and above all to direct the will. Like the magician, the charioteer carries a magic wand. Unlike the magician, he does not raise it above his head to heaven. His power is subordinate to his will. His hands hold no reins. His strong character alone controls the opposing forces in life. This lingam and yoni indicate his mature sexuality, which is under his control. Thus, he is not the victim of his emotions, and his sexual contributes to a satisfying life. The glowing square on his chest, a symbol of vibrant nature, links him to the sensual world of the Empress. But the 8-pointed star on his crown shows his mental energy directing his passions. Symbolists consider the 8-pointed star as halfway between the square of the material world and the circle of the spiritual. His chariot looms larger than the town behind, indicating that his will is more powerful than the rules of society. However, the fact that his chariot is not in motion indicates that he is not a rebel. The wheels of the chariot rest on water, showing that he draws energy from the unconscious, though the chariot itself, resting on land, separates him from a direct contact with that great force. We have mentioned the sexual symbolism of the lingam and yoni. While Hindu myth connects horses to death, Freudian dream symbolism connects them to the sexual energy of the libido. By controlling the horses or sphinxes, the charioteer controls his instinctive desires. Various magic signs adorn his body. His skirt bears symbols of ceremonial magic. His belt shows the signs and planets. The two lunar faces on his shoulders are named Urim and Thummim, the supposed shoulder plates of the high priest in Jerusalem, and which therefore suggests the Hierophant. At the same time, the lunar plates refer to the high priestess. Note also that the cloth at the back of the chariot suggests the high priestess's veil. He has set the mastery of the unconscious behind him. We see therefore in the chariot symbolism all the previous cards of the first line. The wand and symbols indicate the magician. The water, sphinxes, and veil symbolize the high priestess. The stars on his canopy recall the empress's crown. And city symbolizes the emperor. The shoulder plate symbolizes the Hierophant, and lingam and yoni symbolize the lovers. All these forces contribute to the outer personality, and yet observe the chariot with its stone-like qualities. Observe the charioteer himself emerging into his stone vehicle. The mind that subordinates all things to conscious will runs the risk of becoming rigid, cut off from the very forces it has learned to control. Observe also that the black and white sphinxes are not reconciled to each other. They look in opposing directions. The charioteer's will holds them together in a tense balance. If that will should fail, the charioteer and its rider will be torn apart. Paul Douglas has captured the chariot to Jung's idea of the persona. As we grow up, we create kind of a mask to deal with the outside world. If we have dealt successfully with the various challenges in life, then the different aspects symbolized by the other cards will become integrated into this ego mask. But we can too easily confuse the successful persona with the true self, even to the point that if we try to discard the mask, we will fear its loss as a kind of death. This is why the second line of the major arcana, which deals precisely with the release of the self from its outer masks, bears death as its next to last card. So far we have considered the chariot as an emblem of personal maturity, but the idea of human will extends beyond the individual. With its images of the mind subduing and utilizing the forces of life, the chariot is a perfect symbol for civilization, which creates order out of the chaos of nature by using the natural world as the raw materials for its agriculture and cities. One of the chief Kabbalistic connotations for the card extends this idea. By its connection with the Hebrew letter lian, the chariot carries the quality of speech. Speech, as always, seemed to humans to represent the rational mind and its dominance over nature. As for we know, only humans possess language, though chimpanzees have shown themselves capable of learning human sign language, and whales and dolphins may possess developed languages of their own. We may say that speech separates us from the animal. Adam gained control over the beasts and Eden by speaking their names. Most importantly, humans use language to transmit the information that allows civilizations to continue and thrive. However, just as the ego is limited, so is the speech. First of all, speech restricts our experience of reality by forming a description of the world. By giving everything a label, we erect a barrier between ourselves and experience. When we look at a tree, we do not feel the impact of a living organism. Rather, we think, tree, and move on. The label has replaced the thing itself. Also, by relying too much on the rational quality of language, we ignore experiences that cannot be expressed in words. We have already seen how the high priestess signifies intuitive wisdom beyond language. Certain experiences, especially mystical, union with the spirit, cannot be described. Language can only hint at them with metaphors and fables. People who rely totally on speech have even gone so far as to insist that nonverbal experiences, or experiences which cannot be measured by psychological tests, do not exist. This is simply because they cannot be scientifically described. Such dogmatisms receives its perfect symbol in the charioteer's merging with his stone wagon. So far we have considered every symbol in the picture except perhaps the most obvious one, the two sphinxes. White borrowed this innovation from Eliphas Levi, the great pioneer of Kabbalistic tarot. Like the two pillars of the high priestess, or the black and white horses, they replace the sphinxes signify the duality and contradictions of life. Once again, we see the triangular motif. Here, the meditation force is willpower. The use of sphinxes instead of horses suggests several deeper meanings. The sphinx in great legend was a riddler, representing the mystery of life to the people of Thebes. The myth tells us that the sphinx seized the young men of the city and asked them the following riddle: what creature walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? Those who could not answer were devoured. Now, the answer is man, who crawls as a baby, walks upright as an adult, and uses a cane in old age. The implication is clear. If you do not understand your basic humanity with its strengths and weaknesses, then life will destroy you. The chariot symbolizes maturity, accepting the limits of life plus the faculty of speech, that is, rational understanding, which is used to divine existence and therefore to control it. But a further meaning lurks here. The man who answers the Sphinx's riddle was Oedipus, who arrived in Thebes after killing his father. Freud's emphasis on incest has diverted attention from the deeper message of the Oedipus story. Oedipus was the perfect image of the successful man. Not only did he save Thebes from a menace and become king of the city, but he did so by his understanding of life. He knew what man was, yet he did not know himself. His own inner reality remained closed to him until the gods forced him to confront it, and the gods did force him. If the oracle had not spoken first to his father and then to him, Oedipus would never have done the things he did. Therefore, though he understood the outer meaning of man's life, he did not understand either who he really was or his relation to the gods, who controlled his life. And those two subjects are precisely the concern of the second and third lines of the major arcana. In the second, we go beyond the ego to find true self. In the third, we deal openly with archetypal forces of existence and reach at last a full integration of those dualities which the charioteer was able to dominate but never reconcile. The divinatory meanings of the chariot derived from its powerful will. In a reading, the card signifies that the person is significantly controlling some situation through the force of his or her own personality. The card implies that a situation contains some contradictions, that these have not been brought together by simply held under control. This is not to stress too highly the negative undertones of the card. When it is the right way up, the charioteer basically means success. The personality in charge of the world around it. If it appears as the outcome in a reading dealing with problems, then it indicates victory. Reverse, the card's inherent contradictions gain greater force. The chariot upside down implies that the approach of willpower has proven unsuccessful, and the situation has gotten out of control. Unless the person can find some other approach to the difficulties, he or she face disaster. Willpower alone cannot always sustain us. Like Oedipus, we must sometimes learn to give way to the gods.